So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America.
Would a 10-year-old choose to carry a baby?
I believe it would probably impact her life, and so therefore it would fall under any exception and would not be an abortion.
It would not be an abortion if a 10-year-old with her parents made the decision not to have a baby that was a result of a rape?
If a 10-year-old became pregnant as a result of rape and it was threatening her life, then that's not an abortion.
Ms. Warbelow, did you just hear some disinformation?
Yes, I heard some very significant disinformation. An abortion is a medical procedure that individuals undergo for a wide range of circumstances, including because they have been sexually assaulted. It is still an abortion, but there is no exception for the life or the health of the mother in the Ohio law. That's why that 10-year-old had to cross state lines in order to receive an abortion.
A 10-year-old rape victim was called a liar by the ranking member of this committee. And I know that he did that because he doesn't like what that rape victim represents, which is that this law will bring us government-mandated pregnancies for 10-year-olds.
The CDC is currently scrubbing information from their website right now to be in compliance with a recent executive order. Here are some of the pages that have gone down. But look at this list of important information regarding public health. As an example, HIV risk behaviors, preventing HIV, safe food choices for pregnant people. This is really important information that is being scrubbed away from a federal health agency's website.
Group of 4 women who are suing the state of Idaho over their complete and total abortion ban. Rebecca is one of the plaintiffs, and she told her story today in court because she was 16 weeks pregnant in the state of Idaho when she learned her fetus was not developing correctly, had a very rare condition, and the doctor said you need an abortion. And this was really tragic for her and her husband. And so they made the very difficult decision that they needed an abortion, but they couldn't do it in Idaho because no doctor would do it. And so they traveled 7 hours to Portland, Oregon, and on day 1 of a 2-day procedure, Rebecca miscarried at 4 a.m. in a hotel room bathroom with her 2-year-old daughter in the other room. Women are dying because they have to travel state lines for situations like Rebecca's.
We are living at a time of great polarization. While we have one side claiming that women had to fight for their equality, so that now thankfully we are able to own our own credit line without our husband's approval, that women today can now choose to have a life focus on their career or an artistic endeavor, rather than the default line of, having as many kids as humanly possible and basically raising them as a single parent. This side suggests that although things are better than it used to be, and that now in most of the Western world, a woman has somewhat more of an autonomy and the right to choose what kind of life they want to live, things are still far from perfect. There is still the wage gap, the constant sexism and misogyny women face in the workforce, safety concerns in dating, traveling alone, living alone, and so much more. But at the end of the day, women's rights have come a long way, and we should somewhat be grateful to the fact that we aren't bound by a lot of barriers that historically bounded us through specific roles, specific places, and to specific people throughout most of history. And then we have another side that thinks that feminism, oh god, please stop saying that horrible word, I can't stand it, is the worst thing that happened to the world. Feminism essentially caused women to be these angry, bitter monsters that have sworn to hate men for all eternity, for absolutely no reason that I can think of. Because of feminism, now people aren't having kids. People don't respect men, want men, and need men like they used to. And this side is unable to understand why some women have chosen to live either by themselves or with their friends instead of with a man or a partner. These women come to the conclusion that they don't feel like they want to get married or have children who will essentially become another cog in the capitalist machine, always chasing freedom from their meager 9-to-5 existence, but will probably keep working until they're 80 and won't even be able to retire comfortably due to inflation. So there must be something wrong with them, guys. Like in Korea with the 2B movement, it's bad. These women will cause the decline and eventual collapse of the population. This is a big emergency. You guys don't seem to understand how serious this is. We need to keep procreating so that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk has more minimum wage warehouse workers in the future. This is so important that we need to make some legislative changes for, the better of everyone involved, obviously. So what we're gonna do is this. We'll take away abortion rights and restrict birth control, even though the said woman is still practically a child, still wearing braces, unable to drink alcohol, or even vote for that matter. We will expect them to give birth to and raise a fully functioning human child. We will also threaten and harass women who's made it publicly known that they do not have a desire to get married and have children, saying that they are the problem and will no doubt die miserable and alone. Oh yeah, we were supposed to talk about this book I have right here. You might have never read this book or might have been forced to read this at school. As someone who just picked it up completely on my own free will, I'd like to point out that this woman, Margaret Atwood, is a prophet, and why we, as a society in the year of 2025, whether you're a man, a woman, a member of the LGBTQ community, or a polyamorous eclectus parent, should pay attention to what is discussed in this book. You will learn in this video why this book that initially came out in 1985 is so relevant, and I would say the most relevant in this day than ever before, and why this book is one of the most banned books of all time. Oh, would you look at that? It is also one of the banned books for Project 2025. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is about a dystopian novel set in the totalitarian Republic of Gilead that has overthrown the US government. Due to declining birth rates, fertile women called handmaids are forced into reproductive servitude for high-ranking officials. The story follows Offred, a handmaid assigned to a commander. And another reason why we should completely breaks is that Atwood has emphasized that the novel is rooted in historical events, stating, "I made a rule for myself. I would not include anything that human beings had not already done in some other place or time."
And I read that the events in the book came from actual real-life events.
Everything.
Everything?
Everything. Well, I didn't want people saying, "You're certainly a twisted, weird person."
During a trip to the delightful university that is the University of Toronto, where the archives where her classic novel are kept, Atwood speaks about how she came up with the material for The Handmaid's Tale. In the interview, she states, "There was no internet then. You couldn't just go online and put in a topic. So this is just stuff I came across when reading newspapers and magazines." With that being said, I'd like to mention a few very well-known inspirations that Atwood took to give life to her story. Atwood has made no secret that The Handmaid's Tale takes inspiration from the Salem witch trials and the demonizing, threatening, and even killing of innocent women that took place during that time. Atwood cites the 17th century New England resident Mary Webster as a major influence of the book. After a well-respected government and church leader in a small Puritan town of Hadley, Massachusetts fell ill, locals quickly drew the conclusion that a witch had to be involved. Couldn't have been that this guy caught a little cold or something. They decided Webster was the culprit and decided to physically assault her and hang her as a punishment. She survived, but her story, recounted in detail in 1689's Memorable Providences, set the stage for the Salem witch hysteria that began in 1692. To depict the authoritative world run by the extremely religious right in The Handmaid's Tale, Atwood drew upon mainly 17th century Puritan theocracy in America and the political climate of the country in the early 1980s. America was not initially founded as an 18th century Enlightenment republic. It was initially a 17th century theocracy. That tendency keeps bubbling up in America from time to time, Atwood said in a 2017 interview with Indigo. Atwood also points to the election of Ronald Reagan as president and the country's embrace of Christian conservatism as the influences for this book. In 1981, Reagan became the first president to propose a constitutional amendment seeking to restore organized prayer in schools.
The government of a country never gets ahead of the religion.
Reagan also closely aligned himself with religious political organizations like that of Moral Majority and Focus on the Family. The temporary rise in power of these groups caused a fear crackdown on women's access to abortions, and this still continues to resonate in modern-day society amid the turning of Roe v. Wade and other abortion-related legislation. In both the show and the book, handmaids are forced to give birth to children by high-ranking men after they are subjected to ritualized sexual assault by those same men. The wives and husbands then raise those children, while the handmaids are transferred to another household. The handmaids at The Handmaid's Tale are trained for their new roles in Gilead at a place called
Rachel and Leah Center,
aka the Red Center. And the name of the center is a direct reference to the Old Testament story of Rachel and her sister Leah, both of whom married Jacob. While Leah had no trouble conceiving children, Rachel was unable to get pregnant. Frustrated, Rachel offered up her handmaid, Bilhah, to Jacob as a vessel through which she could have children. Bilhah gave birth to 2 sons, both of whom were named by Rachel. In The Handmaid's Tale, the group that overthrew the US government to establish a totalitarian regime and established Gilead are also named Sons of Jacob. According to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, Nazi authorities created the Lebensborn program to increase Germany's population. Pregnant women who were deemed racially valuable were encouraged to give birth to their children at Lebensborn homes. During World War II, the program became complicit in the kidnapping of foreign children from Eastern European countries, particularly Poland, with physical features considered Aryan by the Nazis and forcibly Germanized under the program. SS leader Heinrich Himmler believed that the men of the SS were the biological and racial elite of Nazi Germany, and he urged them to have large families. SS members and their brides had to pass medical examinations and establish their Aryan ancestry before they could marry. This measure was taken to ensure that their children will be racially valuable. At the time, there were strong pressures against single motherhood in Germany. The program offered the mothers financial support and adoption services. In this way, Himmler hoped to discourage abortions. In her interview, Atwood points at a newspaper article about the Lebensborn movement, stating, "The super race child would be bred for looks and loyalty, stalwart, tall, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. Nazism would be his creed, Adolf Hitler his god." In The Handmaid's Tale, women who are seen as promiscuous or as sinners, including lesbians, abortion patients, or anyone who's listened to any Megan Thee Stallion song, are sent to labor camps, where they often die from toxic conditions. The concept of incarcerating women deemed as immoral dates back to a little-known part of American history. According to this 2023 article by Ada McVean, the American plan was a World War I-era public health program designed to combat venereal disease in troops. But I mean, those are a lot of big words, so I'll simplify it for you guys. World War I. A lot of men died in war. A lot more men to die for war needed, but soldiers often incapacitated or dying because they visit a bit too many red light districts and do the horizontal relations with too many women or men. They got a lot of STDs. This creates problem for military. Although soldiers are discouraged from visiting red light districts and brothels, providing morally available alternatives don't really suffice. So instead, the 65th United States Congress passes the Chamberlain-Conn Act on July 9th, 1918. The act implements a public health program that came to be known as the American Plan. It authorized the military police and public health officers to arrest any woman reasonably suspected of prostitution and subject to an invasive screening for sexually transmitted infections. If she tested positive, she was subject to being forcibly quarantined in jails, hospitals, or even former brothels, converted to keep such fallen women in. And interesting enough, even if some women tested negative, they were incarcerated anyways, as their presumed promiscuity was deemed a public health threat. And here it is needless to mention that lower income, lower class, non-white, and marginalized women were subject to the worst kinds of abuse. Some were sterilized against their will and without their knowledge. The phrasing reasonably suspected gave practical excuse or right to its enforcers to arrest anyone they liked. Nearly anything could make you a suspect, from being seen with a soldier to eating alone in public to simply existing in public. In her interview in 2019 at the University of Toronto Library, Atwood talks about an article she collected about the Romanian dictator Ceausescu. This is an article about Ceausescu and Romania. He passed laws that said women had to have 4 babies. They had to have pregnancy tests every month, and if they weren't pregnant, they had to explain why. Under the Ceausescu regime, all contraceptive methods were forbidden and induced abortion was available only for women who met an extremely narrow criteria. Atwood further states about the incident. Ceausescu wanted women to have more babies so that the country would get richer. It was this policy that filled up the Romanian orphanages, which then became a scandal around the world for their inhumane conditions. This won't be the first or last video ever made about The Handmaid's Tale and the history parallels that can be drawn from it. Realistically, I'd have to make a more than 2-hour-long video to explain all the historical influences that went into this book. But this isn't the entire reason I wanted to make this video, so I only included some of the main ones that I think is important to know for general knowledge's sake. I'd like to dedicate the rest of the video to why all of this matters, so that you don't click away from this video thinking, oh, Nazis used to breed their super race Aryan babies, and that, oh, they forcefully incarcerated and sterilized a bunch of black women in the early 1900s. So the moment I click away from this video, I can completely erase it from my memory and continue my daily brain rot. And this is what I truly don't want happening. Hey, are you still there? Hey, my eyes are here. Again, the question is, why does all of this matter? Why, to this day, in the year of 2025, everyone is still talking about The Handmaid's Tale? Why is this book still relevant, or more relevant than ever before? And the answer is simple. As Atwood has stated before countless times, just because time passes and history keeps flowing, it doesn't mean that humanity simply won't make the same mistakes it made before, and that future times will naturally improve for the better. Instead, history has a tendency to be cyclical, with similar events repeating themselves in cycles. And this is why Atwood packages this story as not only a cautionary tale, but also as speculative fiction. Yes, we might think that these things are just awful, dark, and twisted, but hey, they already happened. Oh, how awful it was when they restricted abortion rights to women in Romania, causing the highest recorded maternal mortality of any country in Europe. 159 deaths per 100,000 live births in 1989. But certainly now, with our advanced laws and the advanced medical care system that we have right now, certainly there is nothing happening today in the world that is in any way similar. In The Handmaid's Tale, there are specific reasons that push the formation of the totalitarian republic known as Gilead, and these reasons are declining birth rates and environmental crisis. Due to pollution and radiation, there is widespread infertility. Toxic waste and chemical exposure contributes to birth defects and miscarriages. Political instability and government collapse. A terrorist attack that takes place in The Handmaid's Tale is blamed on extremists, so the US government, Congress, Supreme Court, and President is violently overthrown. Gilead's founders used this crisis to seize power and establish their dictatorship. Religious extremism and theocratic ideals. Radical Christian fundamentalists take advantage of the current crisis, and they believe that returning to traditional gender roles would fix society. Do you guys see where I'm going with this? Like, do you see how all these reasons, how all these factors are a little too close to our reality? Obviously, we don't want this to happen, right? So now I will discuss some very disconcerting symptoms that unfortunately we are heading full throttle towards this type of society. The polarization between young men and women's values. I don't think it's news to anyone at this point that there is a mass polarization in society, with one of the points of tension being the values of young men and women. One of the leading researchers on the topic, Dr. Alice Evans from Stanford University, says, today's under 30s are undergoing a great gender divergence, with young women in the former camp and young men in the latter. Gen Z is 2 generations, not 1. In countries on every continent, an ideological gap has opened up between young men and women. Tens of millions of people who occupy the same cities, workplaces, classrooms, and even homes no longer see eye to eye. So how can we even keep our currently crumbling society keep going on its shaky legs when we can't see eye to eye? The answer seems far from grasp, as we've been so conditioned to vilify groups that don't match with our ideologies. And with the natural progression of social media algorithms, this mass polarization both within genders and values will grow, as we will be presented with posts that hyper-radicalize our opinions, making us more and more angry, eventually to point fingers at whoever is on the other side, with no room for discussion or cooperation. Traditionalism as a trend. Since we're on the topic of social media, you might have come across some of these posts. Posts of these happy, able-bodied, mostly white nuclear families smiling in front of their white fence homes. Posts romanticizing the general aesthetic of older times, and especially the 1950s, or the Victoria era specifically for some reason. Added to this is the recent trend of Tradwives. These are often young and beautiful mothers, showcasing their impressive abilities to make complicated dishes from scratch, while looking like runway models, with an uncanny ability for keeping a Pinterest-perfect house, as their unruly children, who she claims she is raising without help, only appear in some curious editing footage. Are you judging traditional wives? Are you judging people from the 1950s? These women that were happy to cook and clean and serve their husbands and raise their children? You must be one of those crazy cat lady feminists that hate all men and want to create a genderless society like Mao Zedong wanted. And to address these allegations, no, I'm actually also a crazy bird lady. And no, I don't necessarily believe that a heterosexual, cisgender, good-looking, and able-bodied couple getting married and raising children is bad. I'm not judging anyone who wants to live a more traditional kind of lifestyle. And I'm certainly not saying that tradwives can't find fulfillment while occupying stereotypically traditional roles that historically have demanded a lot of unpaid, demanding labor. I just want to point out that for both of these things, the ugly caveats that come with these times and come with these roles are usually hidden behind a glamorized facade that makes these times and roles seem immensely desirable. And the ugly things I'm talking about that are usually glossed over in these posts are the real nature of nuclear families in the 1950s and how being a tradwife affected the women of the time. Similar to what happens in The Handmaid's Tale, we nowadays see a very similar trend of thought. Most people believe that society we live in today is spiritually sick, distorted, unfair, and ugly, and that returning to traditional gender roles will somehow fix society. There is a reason why in these posts that I mentioned, you don't see a black queer family posing in front of their white picket fence mansion, or that these young and beautiful tradwives aren't cleaning puke and scrubbing toilets. These posts and these trends try to hide the excessive sexism, racism, ableism, and domestic violence prevalent at the time, as well as glossing over the experiences a lot of housewives went through at the time. The 1950s ideal of a housewife was heavily promoted in advertising, TV shows, and magazines, depicting women as content and fulfilled by homemaking, similar to that of modern-day tradwives. However, this image was largely constructed to reinforce traditional gender roles after World War II, when women were expected to leave the workforce and return home. A quote from Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique states, "The problem that has no name," which is simply the fact that American women are kept from growing to their full human capacities, is taking a far greater toll on the physical and mental health of our country than any known disease. So women were expected to find fulfillment in homemaking, but many actually long for intellectual stimulation, independence, and careers. Doctors prescribe tranquilizers, like Mother's Little Helper, to manage stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. According to the study conducted by Concordia University, by 1955, 1 in 3 American housewives was on tranquilizers, mainly Valium and Miltown, to cope with stress. But not all women were unhappy. Some genuinely enjoyed raising children, homemaking, and community involvement. Women, especially in wealthier households with maids or domestic help, often had more leisure time and social fulfillment. So essentially, while often white and wealthy women embraced and enjoyed the role of a housewife, the general concept of the 1950s happy housewife was just a social construct and not a universal reality, especially for a lot of demographics. I'm not really meaning to get into the realm of conspiracies here. As you can tell, I try to make this video super watertight with historical facts and data, but I'd still like to share my personal, entirely subjective opinion. I feel as if the part of society that is benefiting from this demographic tension have no intent on changing the way things are going. The frustration, desperation, and the feeling of powerlessness of the general public are actually building blocks to making people more willingly accept radical changes by powers that promise that they will in some way fix society. When people are in a state of general desperation, terror, confusion, uncertainty, or numbness, it is all the more easy for these oppressive and totalitarian power structures to emerge. Countless times in history, economic crises like this one we have made the power structures of the times have an easier time manipulating the masses. Because at these times people are scared for their livelihoods and the safety of their loved ones, they are much more prone to being manipulated with a promise or an illusion of safety and comfort. So prone to being manipulated that back in the day, people regarded people such as Hitler, Lenin, and Mao as heroes, treating them as if they were from divine legends. All three leaders have assumed power over their countries after an extended period of desperation, confusion, and frustration from the general public, promising them to fix the country and the social order for the better, providing a promise of certainty and better times to come. But as the commander clearly remarks in The Handmaid's Tale, better never means better for everyone. It always means worse for some. So today or tomorrow, you probably won't see black leather-booted military man marching down your street, declaring martial law with F-15s flying overhead. Probably today or tomorrow, you won't be plucked from your school, your workplace, or your home to be forcefully placed in a center to be acclimated to the new social order. These are certainly far-fetched and extreme scenarios that would definitely won't happen today or tomorrow, or so we think. As Offred remarks at the beginning of The Handmaid's Tale, nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it. The newspaper stories were like dreams to us, bad dreams dreamt by others. So now, on the news, when we hear that an abortion clinic has been burned down, when a person who needed medical help when she was having a miscarriage died from her bloodlust because the doctors simply refused to help her, when we hear an innocuous comment by an insanely rich billionaire that has political and legislative power that people should be having more babies, and then proceeding to demonstrate an interesting sort of sign language, we should remember that we are already in a heated bathtub. The water we've entered may be lukewarm right now, but similarly, we will be boiled to death before we can realize it. And the disturbing thing in The Handmaid's Tale is that the power structures of Gilead may not be upfront about their methods, but they do somewhat accomplish the things that they promise to do. They eliminate the problem of low birth rates. They control the environmental harm and pollution and reduce it to a minimal level, with a dedicated workforce there to help them willingly clean up extremely toxic radioactive waste. Gilead does deliver on its promises, but it's clear that while some demographics within Gilead have more power, no one is truly fulfilled or happy in this new order, even people like the commander, who occupy the positions of most power. Similarly, with the current global problems we see in our world, whether it is economic instability, homelessness, the housing crisis, the fact that so many people are in debt, the fact that even highly educated people with master's and doctorate degrees struggle to find entry-level jobs, the fact that you might be one layoff away from losing your house, being unable to afford rent and pay for the needs of your family. The anger and frustration towards these issues seem to be misdirected. Instead of this anger being directed at things like economic policies that dictate things like living costs, the job market, and the way that we live, we start focusing on things like, I don't know, whether a trans person should be able to enter a woman's bathroom. Our attention's carefully diverted to why they casted a black girl to play Astrid in the How to Train Your Dragon live-action remake, before asking questions like, wait a minute, I work day in and day out and somehow I can't afford to live? On the surface, the numbers make everything look pretty great. Isn't economic growth the tide that lifts all boats, as a lot of entrepreneurs, politicians, and economists like to say? And technically now, we have both men and women in the workforce. The global GDP is more than ever, just with the ridiculous amount of Timo products that get produced every day. So how come can some people go around in their insanely costly mega yachts around the Caribbean for a nice holiday, while some of us can't afford to live? What can it be? Must be those angry feminists. Definitely not anything else. Up until this point, I might have given the impression that I'm only talking about women's issues, about women's rights, but we can't really talk about women's issues or women's rights while ignoring the elephant in the room: men. So who is really at fault for these oppressive patriarchal imperialist structures that we've constructed? Men or women? The answer seems pretty simple, but as Strick has put it, this issue has layers to it. And you might be there thinking that I will blame all of society's problems on men because statistically, men do control most of the governing power structures of our world and hold most of the world's wealth. All of the things that I just said are still true, but now I will play a reverse card and talk about how not only men perpetuate these power structures. In Bell Hooks' book, The Will to Change, Hooks points out an interesting insight. Men learn the rules of the game and the social roles they must occupy pretty early on to be rewarded in an imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, as she puts it. But when men spend their whole lives trying to mold themselves into these very strict and rigid roles, they often find that fulfilling these roles, despite the status symbol they provide, don't actually make them any happier or give them life satisfaction. So they find themselves angry and frustrated not only at the world, but also at themselves. According to Hooks, men were led to believe that if they played the game of patriarchy and gender roles right, the system would reward them. But even men who've risen up to the high stations in systems or workplaces that are deemed valuable in an imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, a lot of men are still not happy with their lives. Such an example is the commander from The Handmaid's Tale. Seemingly insanely influential and powerful, he is, in reality, so intellectually and emotionally starved that he has to go through hoops to invite Offred to play Scrabble with him in secret. He is so desperate to have any sort of platonic and intellectually stimulating conversations with her, which he's not able to have with his wife, Serena Joy, that you almost feel sorry for him. This is a man who's earned the highest status he can achieve in this world, and yet he's still yearning for something more. The system, which was supposed to reward him the most, is still lacking. Oh, but I thought you weren't only gonna talk about men. Of course, I will hold true to my promise. It's time to dish out some judgment for the ladies this time. Hooks argues that because patriarchy is deeply embedded in society, many women unconsciously pass on patriarchal values to their children, especially their sons, through socialization. And this happens in several ways. Mothers, who are often the primary caregivers, may condition their sons to suppress emotions other than anger. From a young age, boys are discouraged from expressing vulnerability, fear, or sadness because these are seen as unmanly. This emotional suppression ultimately harms men by isolating them from their own feelings and from forming deep emotional connections with others in a symbolical emotional castration. Women sometimes protect and excuse the problematic behavior of the men in their lives, whether it's their sons, husbands, or fathers. For example, a mother might justify her son's aggression as "boys will be boys." Woo! An example of this can also be seen in a scene in The Handmaid's Tale, where Offred describes a documentary she watched as a child, where the mistress of a man that supervised the camps in Auschwitz was interviewed. Offred describes the attitude of the mistress, who lived next to the camps, yet denied knowing about the ovens. What could she have been thinking about? Not much, I guess. Not back then. Not at the time. She was thinking about how not to think. The times were abnormal. She took pride in her appearance. She did not believe he was a monster. He was not a monster to her. Probably he had some endearing trait. He whistled off-key in the shower. He had a yen for truffles. He called his dog Lykeman and made it sit up for little pieces of raw steak. How easy it is to invent a humanity for anyone at all. What an available temptation. Many women have been raised with patriarchal structures themselves and may unknowingly adopt and pass on its values. Even feminist-minded mothers can struggle against deeply ingrained societal expectations and end up reinforcing traditional gender roles in ways that they don't consciously intend. Serena Joy, the commander's wife in The Handmaid's Tale, is a powerful example of internalized misogyny, as she actively upholds and enforces the oppressive system of Gilead, despite being a victim of it herself. Once a public advocate for traditional gender roles, she ironically finds herself confined to a life of domestic powerlessness. Yet she still enforces the subjugation of other women, particularly Offred. Rather than sympathizing with the handmaids, Serena exerts control over them. Her bitterness and cruelty toward Offred, despite her own suffering, highlight how women can become enforcers of misogyny, maintaining systems that ultimately harm them in the name of tradition and power. This is one of the main reasons why, although men predominantly occupy positions of power in the world of Gilead, the people who are tasked with watching over, monitoring, and even training the women of the old world to acclimate to the rules and social order of Gilead are women. Aunts and wives are especially crucial in this hierarchy. Even the classification aunt has an eerie notion of familial bonds and an indication of warmth and familiarity, allowing other women to view the figure like an older aunt which you might be related to. The name suggests a familial connection with the intention of building trust, but this is chosen specifically for that reason, so that the submission to the new social order is as smooth as possible. The aunts might pretend like they're figures of benevolence, there to take in and take care of you in the world of Gilead, but their actual role is to maintain social order and reframe mindsets about a lot of things like religion, sexual assault, abortions, and to punish those who do not get along with the program. So, as I've initially hoped, will I, with this one video, be able to single-handedly change everyone's opinions about their political beliefs, make people conscious about how the constant violence we're exposed to in our news makes us numb to changes in legislations in our countries that slowly take away our rights, and make people realize that the power structures we're subject to are also things we learned in our childhood, which we might perpetuate unconsciously even if we're harmed by them. end the gender divide, stop all wars, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, world hunger, homelessness, make everyone hold hands and sing Kumbaya in the meadow? Probably not. But my original intention behind making this video was to show that we have a lot to learn from history and the eerie way that history repeats itself, and that there is a great reason to be worried in a highly polarized, highly divided society, similar to the one we live in, as such a society is actually beneficial for oppressive totalitarian regimes to emerge, as in these times people can't come together and protest and fight as a united front. A divided and disjointed society is a weak one. The Handmaid's Tale is a warning to keep our laws and our rights intact. We've been warned, and so far, we haven't really listened. To be honest, guys, this is all very extreme, dark, far-fetched stuff. So we can just cruise along, keep our eyes closed and our ears plugged. Oh, I just got an email. That's strange. It's saying that I've been laid off from my job. They didn't really give a reason why, but apparently all the women in the company aged 18 to 35 have been laid off for some reason. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. I'm sure it will all blow over. Oh, my coworker just texted me. He said, you shouldn't feel too sad. Now you can use your most fertile years for an actually good reason to fulfill your biological destiny. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about in general. I think I still have enough money in my bank account saved up for rent for the next few months. Let me just go check my bank account. Okay, so my entire bank account has been emptied out without my knowledge. So I'm kind of getting slightly worried, but I'm sure that everything is okay, guys. I'm sure that this will all blow over and everything will go back to normal. I'm sure everything is gonna be